tracking fingerprinting users.
By the way, we're live now. Okay.
Oh, good.
Yeah, now we're live. Now we're live. We weren't live a moment ago. But this particular setting is specific for, I believe, the intention for laptop users. And when those laptop users take their MacBook from public Wi-Fi location to public Wi-Fi location, it's not intended or useful to me as an iMac owner and or a Mac Mini owner. There's little to no benefit to having that on my desktop Mac.
Well, yes, it would be very rare for you to move your desktop from place to place. Mind
Correct.
you,
that is my point. And so if this new setting is causing me problems, then turn it off.
The trouble is that Apple can't really differentiate your intention of whether you're going to move your computer or not. I mean, one of the things that is starting to be quite interesting on as a trend is because the new Mac Mini is so tiny, you can pop it in a bag and take it around with you from Wi-Fi network to Wi-Fi network.
Sure, you could.
So if you look at the setting that they have set, which admittedly is much more useful on a mobile computer, i.e. a laptop, nowadays, because of the size of machines and the versatility of what you can do, Apple can't really fully expect what you're going to do with said computer, whether you're going to leave it where it is and never move it from one network to another, or whether you aren't. So a blanket setting that applies for everything is probably a good idea.
If I give you my MAC address for my Wi-Fi network, I dare you to go out on the internet, Darren, and find detailed, sensitive information about me. I dare you to do that with the MAC address from my Mac. Please do.
That's just one variable. That's unlikely.
Well, right. The likelihood of this having any effect at all on me as a user is virtually nil.
But it's the combination of all the data that's been gathered about you as a fingerprinted user.
But
it's
even
not
then,
just one setting.
Even then, a properly set up router is going to be passing its MAC address along, not yours. So,
again, yes, for MAC addresses. But,
well, and that's what you're saying this is. You're saying that this is changing the MAC address of my Wi-Fi adapter, not the IP address.
Yeah, the idea of rotating your MAC address so that as you move from network to network, they can't. It's not targeting as such. Say, for instance, you go to a coffee shop with a laptop and you buy something, and you've done an actual transaction.
Right.
That if your MAC address never changes, that potentially that transaction could be logged against you as a fingerprinted user for the same transaction for that.
Who's tracking that?
So your bank details might be able to.
Who is tracking that?
Who's
tracking that?
Well,
are you saying that the coffee shop is tracking that?
Not necessarily. I mean, a lot of the issues with using coffee shop Wi-Fi is more of a man-in-the-middle attack, where there's someone else.
That's someone else on the network.
Coffee shop.
That's someone else on that network.
That can
exactly
sniff all traffic. Exactly.
Now, a properly set up network at a coffee shop, which is not a recommended way to connect to the internet anyway, but a properly set up network
they'd have a guest network though.
Is going to have isolated.
Separated, yes.
You're going to be isolated from the other devices on that network, for one. And two, you should be using an encrypted connection to connect to that network. So...
yeah, you should be using a VPN or something like that, which is what...
No. I mean, just to connect to that network, it should be encrypted.
Oh, the encrypted...
Not only are you isolated, but it should be encrypted.
But it's... often anyone joining the same network as you can see traffic from other users on that same network.
If it's not encrypted,
you are protected.
You're talking about a completely open, unencrypted connection to a Wi-Fi network.
No, just no. I'm probably not explaining this very well.
Well, no, WPA at the minimum, WEP encryption, even though it can easily be broken, but WPA2, WPA3, that is an encrypted connection between you and the router you're connecting to. Now,
yes,
if that router is
also connected to the same network, can see objects on the same network they're connected to that you're connected to.
Provided that network is set up properly so that the devices are isolated.
Your network is encrypted at home, isn't it? So
sure.
if you invite someone else with a laptop into your home and you allow them to join your main network, they can see and probe the other devices on said network because you're both on the same one.
Only if I allow them to connect my primary network. If they connect to my guest network.
If you allow them to connect to your primary network, that's right.
But who does that? See, you let them connect to your guest network.
What a coffee shop would do. A coffee shop has a guest network.
Right.
So you would attach to that guest network, and then someone else that visits the coffee shop attaches to the same guest network, and you both, because you're in the same network, can see each other's devices.
Only if they're not isolated. If the network is set up improperly.
Each user isn't isolated. That guest network is open to whoever joins it.
Guest network users should be isolated by default. That's how guest networks are typically set up these days.
Main network, but they're not isolated from each other.
Sure they are. That's the point. That is a setting on most routers now, is to isolate guest network users so that they cannot see each other.
Well, if it's done in hardware to not be able to see each other.
This is what I'm saying, Darren.
Network, then that's okay.
This is what I've been saying. Yes, that's how it should be set up. That is the default setup on most guest networks now, is to set up your guest network so that devices that connect are isolated from each other and cannot see each other's traffic.
That is interesting because I have connected to several networks which I can then see who else is connected to the same network.
Now, perhaps they're running WRT54Gs. Maybe that's what they're using.
Maybe.
As long as they're using modern hardware.
If you've got no software protection, then you rely on their implementing their hardware protection. Yeah.
Well, sure. Hardware protection should be an expected default. If you can't count on there being hardware protection, then you should not be using their network, or you should be using a VPN. But
well, yes. That's why I always say that it's a good idea to use your own phone hotspot rather than unknown Wi-Fi.
Well, exactly.
Because at least you know where the traffic is going.
Yeah. Oh, goodness. Hey, everybody. How you doing?
Hi. Kind of okay.
We have two people watching right now, and they walked in inadvertently, unknowingly. They walked into this argument we've been having for like 3 days now.
Wow.
Anyway, it's not really an argument. There's a new setting in Sequoia that caused all manner of problems for my Mac Mini when I upgraded it at the office. So this is just a little background information here, Darren. And that setting is under your Wi-Fi, and then details for the particular network you're connected to. This is not a blanket setting. This is a per network setting. It's a
per network setting. Yeah.
You know, if this really were a super critical thing, in my opinion, it should be a system-wide setting, not a per network setting, because who's going to remember to go turn this on for every single network? But there is a setting in there called private Wi-Fi address. And by default, that is set to rotating. This is a brand new setting in Sequoia.
Yeah.
And by default, it is set to rotating. And that setting causes issues with a number of different third-party router manufacturers. The fix
it just so
for
happens
that,
it doesn't cause any issue of mine, but
well, because you're not set up as rotating. We've established that.
I'm not yet, but I was originally.
Right.
But that didn't cause me any problems.
However, by default, when this Mac booted, it just refused to connect to the network. And when it did connect to the network, it would stay connected for a very brief period of time and then drop the connection. The solution, and this is a problem that's affecting, from what I can tell, a ton of users.
Is it a problem or a feature?
It's a problem. You should not be enabling this without on a working system. Now, I'm not talking about a brand new computer. I'm talking about a computer that's otherwise working, enabling something that's going to break that network connection or potentially break it. They should have discovered this in beta testing, that this causes problems with third-party routers, and said, maybe we should let people know about it. Maybe we should give people the opportunity to turn it on, but let's not turn it on blanket, because that's going to break their network connections. All right, wait a minute. I got to get off my soapbox. All right, here we go. The fix for this is to, some people say, to change that setting from rotating to fixed. And my argument is to just turn it off. This is a desktop computer. I'm on a network that I manage, that I run. I'm not going to be tracking my movements of this computer. I'm not going to be doing anything nefarious with this computer. The computer never moves off this network, and turning it off fixed the problem. So I turned it off. Now, the other setting that I do not recommend turning off, although I do turn it off because it doesn't affect me either, is the limit IP address tracking. Eric and I have talked about this in a past episode. It's kind of an ersatz VPN type feature, but it's not a real VPN. And it only affects you or benefits you if you are using Mail or Safari. It does not benefit you if you are not using Mail or Safari. So in my case, I don't use Mail or Safari, so I turn off limit IP address tracking.
But one of the tracking things that websites do is to look for your that sort of data and include that in the fingerprint that they gather for you as you traverse various websites. So when you
and if you're using Chrome, good luck. Good luck if you're using Chrome.
Well, exactly.
But if you're using Firefox or another privacy-aware browser,
that's a bit better. Yes.
You have this type of functionality built into it already. So
yes.
Anyway,
agreed, that is better. Yeah.
But the new setting, private Wi-Fi address, is what caused my problems. And allegedly, by setting it to fixed, that would take care of it. I experimented with that a little bit. I did still seem to have some issues, so I just turned it off. Anyway, that's what we've been debating.
Yeah.
The usefulness of this new feature. I think it probably is useful if you are on a mobile device, and that mobile device regularly connects to public unsecured networks.
True.
If you are connecting to private secured networks, I see little to no benefit to it personally. But that's me. So there you go. Aren't you glad you walked into the middle of that? Oh, see, we lost one. Now we're down to one viewer.
I won't
see,
carry on. Are we down to one viewer? Oh my God, we're losing
we
viewers.
completely lost one in that process. All right.
Oh.
Anyway, so
I won't delve any deeper on that
one. we'll delve into it deeper in a future episode. How about that?
Indeed, yes. Yeah, that's a good idea.
All right. So, what you know the topic. You know the topic, Darren. A little pre-show setup here. Eric and I have done this before. I'll mention this. Eric can't join in this episode. He was ready to join in, but unfortunately he can't join in this episode.
That's a shame.
But I've kind of broken this down. I think I shared this with you into three primary categories: the Finder, Dock, general settings, and then, maybe some default apps that we like. So that's kind of the order I'm going to tackle them in, but I'm completely open to approaching this in a different order if you prefer. Otherwise, that's how I'm going to try to steer the conversation.
No worries. I do have a slightly different order, but
okay.
Just keep you on your toes.
What's your order?
Oh, my order is settings tweaks, Finder tweaks, dock and desktop tweaks, and app tweaks.
Gotcha. Okay. Desktop to me is Finder, so I kind of.
Yeah.
Wait, I said desktop, right?
Pretty
desktop.
Same thing. Yeah.
Kind of Finder. So that's kind of where I. Let me disconnect from that Mac Mini. All right, there we go. That's better. So I have a little lead into this, and then we'll just kind of go from there. Maybe I'll even throw it to you first, but let me see. How do I have my lead in here? Yeah. We can even throw it to you first if you want to.
Okay, yeah, I could start off, yeah.
Question. Do you have an essential app you would like to share this episode?
Oh, no, there's
if not, I have one.
Think of that.
I have one, but if you...
good. In that case, I don't have one, so that is good, yes.
Okay.
Excellent.
And the one I have, I actually have a couple, but the one I have ties into one of the settings changes that I make. So...
Oh, perfect.
There you go.
Perfect segue. There we go.
Perfect segue, exactly. And not the self-balancing kind.
I used to love that. I used to love the self-balancing segue. Mind you, I did dislocate my shoulder by falling off one, but apart from that...
Did you really? Wow. I want a C5. That's on my wish list. I want a C5.
It's funny that, like, back in the day, they were derided, but
I know.
They're so sought after. I mean, God, if you could get hold of a C5, you're king of the hill.
If anybody does not know what we are talking about, do a search for Sinclair C5, and yes, you will find all manner of derision for this device. But effectively, it was a personal electric scooter. Would you call it a scooter or a motorcycle,
a scooter,
or a
tiny car type?
bike?
Was it a three-wheeler? It was a
I think he called it a trike, didn't he? Was it a three-wheeler?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, he called it a trike.
Yeah.
But Clive Sinclair was
way ahead of its time. Fantastic.
Oh my gosh, he was a freaking genius. And the C5 was, let's see, what was the year of that? Roughly, was that 85?
85? Oh my God, we both thought of the same year.
I think it's around 85.
Yeah.
So if you think about it, 1985, to come up with this, battery
electric car, essentially
battery-driven electric car, was a genius move, but it was so far out there. I mean, he always did stuff that was easily 5+ years ahead of where everybody else was.
Absolutely.
I mean, look at the original Sinclair computers. Look at the original Sinclair calculator. Indeed. For goodness sakes.
I think the thing that did for the C5 here was we had quite a few news stories about it. One of them was particularly infamous, which could be interesting to search for on the old YouTubes. But there is, I think, a BBC News story about it, whereby he was demonstrating it, and unfortunately at the time, an absolutely massive 40-ton truck pulled up beside him and nearly squished Sir Clive whilst he was demonstrating it on live TV. So that went down quite badly. Most people thought that, oh my God, if I'm going to buy a C5, I'm likely to end up dead in the next week. So the sales didn't go well.
Well, Anyway, so that's the original Sinclair Pocket television. Oh my gosh, there was so much amazing technology in
that when I was little.
Did you have one?
Oh, I didn't know, no, but it was very
did.
close to. Oh, this will be a real geek out sort of situation. Do you remember the series Space 1999?
Sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. They had it's not tubular. It was a square video com link, black and white video com link. That was essentially exactly what the Sinclair TV was.
Here was the genius of it, and you were just hinting at this, and then we'll get to recording the show. The genius of the Sinclair Pocket television, right? So the Sinclair Pocket television, here's the genius of it. This is how this man thought. It wasn't an LCD screen. It was a picture tube.
It was a CRT.
It was a CRT in a pocket television about this large.
A 4-inch that TV. Thick. Yeah, that's it.
And the way he got it to work was he bent the picture tube. It was a CRT with a bent tube. And so as you're shooting the electrons at the screen, electrons at the screen, you're bending them around the corner in order to display the picture. It was genius that he was able to do this. And I did have one. And the interesting thing about them is they use these flat pack batteries. And after a while, you couldn't get those flat pack batteries anymore. They were Polaroid Polapack batteries. And they were flat, and they slipped into a slot on the TV to power it. Now, in retrospect, he probably should have used AA's or something like that. But he used this because it was a way to maintain the thinness of it, while also having enough room for this bent picture tube setup that was inside of it. So we use these flat Polapulse batteries, and the only other use that I know of for these batteries was in Polaroid film cartridges.
Cameras.
The cartridges, not even the camera, the cartridges.
Oh, I see. Oh, God,
right. The film cartridges would go into the camera, and the cartridge itself supplied power to the camera.
So, yes, I had one of those, yes.
When I could no longer find the Polapulse batteries, I went after spent Polaroid film cartridges, because once all the film was used, all it had all been spit out and all the pictures were taken, the battery was not spent. The battery was still good.
Yeah, so the battery was fine, yeah.
You would crack open these cartridges and take out the battery, and it was built a little different. It was on a piece of cardboard, and the contacts on it didn't quite match up to the contacts of the Polapulse battery, so you had to tear back the paper a little bit. But once you did that, slide it into the Sinclair TV, and you had power. It was amazing. So there you go. There you go. Crazy stuff we did to keep our electronics running. Anyway.
Well, that's it. I mean, electronics were very innovative back in the day, because that was the time when all the inventions happened, and the computing scene back then. So many 8 and 16-bit computers everywhere. It wasn't like one or two computers with just like one or two operating systems we're talking about nowadays. It was like every machine for itself. I mean, some of the machines, there's an obscure machine called the Sword M5, which had a cartridge on it which ran Fortran. So its main language was Fortran, unlike any other, and until you put the cartridge in, it did nothing.
Well, that was pretty much any computer, wasn't it? Until you booted the disk,
yes.
Or you put in a cartridge.
Every operating system was different. Yeah.
They're all different. Well, I mean, no, that's not any computer, because many of the computers had their basic operating system built into the ROM, right? So many of them had
that. That's it, on a chip.
On a chip. But
mind you, I mean that was good back in the day, because rather than the touch and go possible experience that you have sometimes nowadays with modern operating systems and the half an hour to an hour upgrade cycle you get. When you upgraded your Amiga operating system back in the day, you just popped the lid off, put a different chip in, and as soon as you turned it on, 2 seconds later, you're upgraded.
You were upgraded.
So in a way, the old way was better.
Yeah, in a way, it was. Okay, one more thing. No, we should probably get to recording.
we should probably start the actual show, I suppose.
All right, we'll get to recording.
Oh dear.
All right, where are we here? We are about 9 minutes and 50 seconds into the audio recording. And I'll just get started here. How you doing? You doing okay?
I'm pretty much still alive, yes.
All right.
I might mute myself every now and then and have a bit of a cough. But yes, I'm almost 80% alive.
Works for me.
Cool.
Okay. Then we will get started here. Okay. Ready? Here we go. In 3, 2, 1. It's For Mac Guys Only, episode number 443 for January 10th, 2025. Fantastic Mactastic Tweaks. Hey everyone, welcome back to For Mac Guys Only, the show for the Mac community, where we share our thoughts and opinions on current Mac news and events. And what better way to ring in the new year than by sharing a few fantastic Mactastic tweaks and by welcoming Darren Davies as a regular on the show alongside Eric and I. Welcome, Darren.
Hello there. Honored to be a regular member.
Yes. This is going to be great, to have the three of us on the show and debating back and forth. And I'm really looking forward to the new viewpoints that you're going to bring to the show as we move forward.
Excellent. Yeah.
Now, the bad news is that Eric was unable to join us this week, but we are going to be keeping his co-host seat warm until next time. So we'll talk to him then. I don't know why I said that. And remember, if you are joining us live, I'll be keeping an eye on the chat room too. So if you have any questions or comments as we move along, be sure to drop it in the chat room, and we'll try to address it as we move along here. As we've talked about recently, Darren, one of the easiest ways to set up a new Mac, especially if you're a long-time Mac head, is to migrate everything forward from your old Mac to the new one. Whether that's from a time machine backup or a clone of your old drive, migrating your apps and settings and data forward is actually a pretty darn simple thing to do during the initial setup process on a new Mac.
Even from a Windows machine, would you believe?
I do not believe that, but that's a conversation for another time. Because maybe pulling your stuff forward from an old Mac to a new one is a little too simple. But the end result is that we end up with a Mac that's faster and more powerful than ever before. But the good news is that it feels comfortable and it feels ready for us to get to work or get to play. So it's easy to forget that setting up a new Mac, especially for folks who are new to the Mac, can take days of tweaking and changing settings and asking tons of questions before things are working just the way that you want them to. Now, I don't know about you, Darren, but never, ever is that more clear than when I sit down at the keyboard of someone else's Mac and I quickly find that the tweaks that I've grown used to using are nowhere to be found. Now, interestingly, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk over to you. But interestingly, I recently had the opportunity to help someone set up a new Mac, and it was a secondary Mac. So it wasn't a simple bring everything forward type of a setup. But I took notes. And since it wasn't
well
a
done.
Mac for me, I didn't want to go overboard with making tweaks and things like that, but mostly I took notes of what I would do if I were setting it up for myself. What changes do I make to the Finder? What changes do I make to the dock? What changes are made in settings? How do I set up the environment to work best for me? What about apps? What do I find myself loading for the first time on any new Mac?
Yeah.
And while my list is not exhaustive by any means, I thought it might be fun if we could share some of the tweaks that we make to the Finder, the settings, and even the apps that we use whenever we set up a new Mac. Now,
Cool.
Darren, we talked about this before recording. We thought maybe we'd break this down into various categories like Finder tweaks and dock tweaks, dock tweaks, settings tweaks, or as we used to call them, preferences, and then maybe the apps that we install too. You said you had a particular order that you like to approach things. I always like to start with tweaking the Finder, but where do you start when you're setting up a new Mac?
I usually start with going through the settings. Also for me, because I usually prefer doing a fresh start when I get a new Mac. So I don't generally do the migration assistant approach, although that's entirely valid. I don't like bringing too much history and craft and stuff from my old sessions throughout the years through one new Mac and another new Mac and another new Mac. So I like to start from fresh when I get a new machine. And it's sort of, in a way, a little bit of a treat just to go through, because often the operating system is new. So it's a good idea, a good opportunity, I think, anyway, when you get a new Mac, whether you use Migration Assistant or not, to go through the options and especially the settings menu to see what's there, what's changed, what's new, what may or may not be, there could be new settings there that you never had a record of before in your previous account migration. So it could be a new setting that you didn't even know existed. So just going through them is a good idea anyway, I think. But for me, I've got my photos in iCloud Photo Library. I've got all my documents in iCloud. I've got my account syncing. So when I just go through a small number of steps to set up a brand new Mac, I'm pretty much at home as if I'd run Migration Assistant, but I haven't run it at all. So I can usually set up a new Mac quite quickly because all my data is already ready to sync as soon as I log into my Apple account. So I usually start off with settings tweaks.
That's interesting. I personally don't sync my desktop or documents to iCloud. And the reason is I tend to have a purpose for every Mac that I use, whether it's the notebook Mac or the desktop Mac or, the Mac at the office or what have you. That sounds like an excessive number of Macs. But anyway, I tend not to sync my documents and desktop because I like them set up in a particular way for each of them. And I think that that's a really important point. Obviously, making tweaks to the Mac settings is a very, very personal choice. There's a reason it used to be called preferences and not settings, because it's how you prefer to work. Are there any particular tweaks that you like to make to settings other than enabling iCloud, which is part of the setup process, is enabling iCloud, right? But are there any particular tweaks that you like to make?
Yeah, there certainly are. Actually, I've written a whole list down. So I don't know if you want to flip flop between. Oh, excellent. I mean, there's three settings I make absolutely right away because the defaults just make me lose my mind. I can barely use a Mac without making these three settings, which is one of the reasons why I always jump into settings first. And they're all mouse settings. So the first settings I set, there's three mouse settings. One and I'm definitely going to get some hate for this, I'm sure. But one is turning off natural scrolling on a because I use lots of different operating systems. None of which have adopted natural scrolling by default. So, some allow you to do that, but some, almost all of them do not have natural scrolling as default. I've got so used to unnaturally scrolling that I turn that feature off. I can't cope with it. If natural scrolling is turned on, my brain goes upside down. And I can't use the Mac. So I turn that off. I also find the mouse speed very, very slow by default, so I push it up right to the edge. It goes as fast as it'll go.
Wow! And I can't do that. I cannot have it that quick.
I go as fast as it's possible to go.
I might tweak the tracking speed, which is what we're talking about here, right? We're talking about tweaking what they call the tracking speed. Yes. But oh my gosh, if I set it all the way up,
right to the
where you have just the slightest mouse movement and you're moving all oh my gosh, I couldn't do that. But I'm totally with you on the natural scrolling.
I have acceleration turned on as well, so I have the fastest speed and acceleration turned on.
Well, you're bonkers. You're bonkers.
Well, yes, I'm clearly mad. This is true. And the other mouse setting that I make sure is there is to turn on all the gestures. I absolutely love the Magic Mouse because of all the things that people sometimes forget that having multi-touch gestures on a mouse allows you to do.
Right.
Isn't something people generally think of. Like, for instance, using side-by-side scrolling on a spreadsheet with inertia. You can't do that without enhanced touch gestures. And I turn things on like double tap to enter
on a trackpad.
Mission control.
On the mouse.
On the mouse.
On
the mouse, yes. Double tap for mission control. It gives you such an easy, quick way. Because I use spaces so much, it gives you an exceptionally quick and fluid way to flip between spaces and go into mission control and move windows around from one space to another. Just so you don't have to click anything. You just double tap with two fingers and mission control. You're into it and you're moving things around. So
I have that on too, by the way. Yeah.
The first settings I set, which then stops me from going crazy when I'm setting up a new Mac. Those first three settings, that sorts me out pretty much.
Those, I mean, other than the tracking, the tracking, gosh, I don't get that. I have to admit, I think that high speed of tracking would drive me a little crazy. But I get it. I get it because if you think about back in the day when we had rollerball type mice and you had to move that cursor across the screen, it was pick up, drop, move, pick up the
mouse, drop it down.
And tracking speed became super, super important because then you could move that mouse just a tiny bit and get the cursor across the screen to where it is. But now with the laser-driven mice, it feels just a little too fast to me. But you're not wrong. I do tweak it a little bit because I like to make minor movements on the desktop. But I think a minor movement resulting in the mouse moving that quickly would be a little much for me. But I do agree with you. And in fact, I think, I said that I like to do a few Finder tweaks first. And I think it's probably fair to say that my Finder tweaks are really kind of settings tweaks as well. Because one of the first modifications that I make to any Mac, because like you, if this is not turned on, I'm lost, and that is to enable double clicking the title bar to minimize a window. I believe by default it's set to, I'll have to look at it. So every once in a while, I'm going to be looking at my own settings just to see if I can figure out what the default is. But I believe the default is to either, I think it might be set to zoom. Is it set to zoom or is it set to do nothing? I can't remember.
Do nothing, I think.
I set it to
I don't know, actually. God.
double click a Windows title bar to minimize. And yes, I know I could click the little yellow minimize button, but my muscle memory is such that if I can't double click that title bar and minimize the window and it zooms or worse does nothing, I'm like, what is broken? Why is my Mac not working the way it's not my Mac, it's someone else's Mac. Okay, maybe I should not enable this. But it's the very first thing that I enable when I sit down, because it's one of the first things I miss. Because I'm as I'm setting up a new Mac, I'm so used to moving windows around and minimizing them. If I can't minimize it by double clicking that title bar, I wonder why it won't minimize. And then finally the light goes off in my head that I've yet to make that change. The next thing I do, I guess could be argued is a setting, but it's really a Finder setting. I'll open up a Finder window and I will go into the view options with that Finder window having focus. Now, this is kind of important. If you don't have a Finder window with focus, you're not going to be making changes to how your Finder windows operate. You might be making changes to how Finder in general operates, or you might be making changes to how the desktop operates, but
not the default.
Not the default. So I will open up a Finder window, make sure that has focus, and then under View, the View menu, Show View Options, the very first thing I do is turn on Sort by Name. I like to have
I have Sort by Kind.
See that's why they call it preferences, right? No, they call it settings now, but you know what I mean. I have it sorted by name. It's very difficult for me to locate what I'm looking for if it's sorted any other way. So I have to have it sorted by name, and I do click use as defaults, but you're right. You could set it by kind. You can even turn on sorting folders first if you are moving from the Windows environment and like to have those windows or folders at the top. You can do that. But I do like to have all of my icons arranged alphabetically, and that's one of the first things I do. Now, with the view options still open, what I'll do is I'll click the desktop. Now, this is what I was talking about. If you have a window with focus, you're affecting how the windows work. If you have the desktop in focus by clicking on it, then you're affecting how that works. But I'll select the desktop, and then again, I'll go to sort by, but I won't sort by name. I don't like to have my desktop sorted by name. I like to have my desktop just simply snapping to the grid. As I move stuff around, I don't want icons to accidentally overlap each other, so I set it to snap by grid.
No, it's so messy.
I know, it's very messy. And yet I don't like stacks. Stacks to me feels like
no, I don't like stacks.
I'm hiding stuff, and when stuff is hidden, I don't pay attention to it, and when I don't pay attention to it, it doesn't get done.
That's
Excuse me.
I do the same. The only thing I would add to the Finder side of things is I also default to column view, which I prefer as the main view for things. So then every time I open a Finder window, it's always going to be in column view, which just suits me. I really like column view, and you can't find that on any other operating system. It's a macOS unique thing, I think, column view.
I think there is a column view-esque type view under Windows and Linux both, isn't there? Like something where you can see. I guess you don't drill down the same way. Yeah, it's more of a detail view, isn't it, when you're on Windows and Linux? Yeah, I think it is very unique to the Mac. Yeah.
The specific way that the macOS does column view to jump in and back and forth between subfolders in dynamic columns, I don't often see anywhere. I don't think I've seen anywhere else. But yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
One of the things I like. I also turn on the status bar in Finder so that I can see what's going on. And also because I'm a bit of moving from different operating systems to Mac and back and forth again as well, I turn on file name extensions. Although it's not needed for Macs.
Interesting.
It does confuse things rather a lot when you're jumping around to different other computers that rely on file name extensions. So I sort of I've set myself to set the file name extensions to be the default for everything. So then whatever I produce on the Mac with a file name extension is immediately recognized on other machines, or else they'd have no hope of knowing what on earth is going on.
Well, I guess technically the file extensions are there. We're just not seeing them. Here's the funny thing, Darren. On Windows, I do enable file name extensions. And the reason I do that for clients is because without them enabled, I feel it's a little too dangerous in the Windows environment with how easy it is for someone
it certainly is. Yes.
create a document called, say, read this important document .pdf.exe. If that .exe is hidden, they think they're clicking a PDF and they're really running a piece of malware. So on Windows environments, I do enable file name extensions, but I don't necessarily enable them on the Mac. So it's kind of interesting how we differ in that regard. The funny thing is, though, I laughed a little bit because the very next thing I do after I turn on all the sorting and snapping to grid and all that is that under the Finder's View menu, I always turn on Show Status Bar, which is exactly what you said you do too.
Perfect. Great minds think alike.
For those who don't know, what that does is it enables a little extra bar at the bottom of every Finder window that not only allows you to quickly, it allows you to quickly resize the icons in the window if you need to do that from time to time. It's a little slider over on the right of the status bar, but it also gives you general information not only about that folder, but also your primary storage drive. It tells you how much free space you're dealing with, which I think is a very nice, handy thing to have. And also when you're selecting icons and folders, it tells you how many you have selected and things like that. So I just find the status bar to be super useful. Along those lines, one of the last tweaks that I make to the Finder, and I've got a few others to the Finder settings, which we'll get to when you talk about those. But one of the last tweaks I make to the Finder in terms of how I work with it is I add a path button to the Finder Windows toolbar. Now, I do know that you can control click the top icon of a Finder window, or you can hover over it and you can get the same info. I just find the path button faster, so I turn it on.
Yes.
And it's a very nice, handy way to see where you are in relation to everything else on your Mac. Sometimes it gets confusing. I spoke with a client the other day that had 2 folders on their Mac called Google Drive. 2. And they were working in one. And it just so happened that the one they were working in was not the actual Google Drive folder. So I showed them.
They were working in the drive that didn't sync.
They were not. It was interesting because they were actually syncing to iCloud. They weren't syncing to Google Drive. Google Drive wasn't syncing because they weren't saving anything to it. So I showed them the path bar button and how they can tell when they're in the Google Drive folder that's within their home folder and documents versus the Google Drive folder that's under locations, which is where they put it now on the Mac. So in that case, it was very easy for them to see, oh, that's where I am. And they could have 2 windows open. They could move the stuff they inadvertently saved to the wrong folder into the right one. And they were able to keep track of where the stuff was because they could easily see that hierarchy of folders to let them know exactly where they were.
I did something similar to someone who was in exactly the same situation. They had 2 folders to the same thing and was saving data to the one that wasn't syncing. So all their data was vulnerable to getting lost very easily. So what I did for them was to customize the sidebar specifically by dropping items in there for the items that they should be using. So,
Yes.
so the one that they shouldn't be saving data to was sort of hidden in a way, but the one they should be using was highlighted nicely in the list of the customized sidebar. And it's one of the things that annoys me when people say that macOS isn't configurable, because as you said, like adding a button to the top of the Finder window and customizing your own set of buttons and customizing what appears on the sidebar and how things are laid out. There's hundreds of ways of customizing just the Finder. So the people that say macOS isn't a customizable OS just do not understand, or have probably never used a modern version of macOS.
But heck, they didn't even use a version of classic macOS. I mean, it's always
Maybe,
been...
yeah, I'll have to get off my soapbox now.
It's always been reasonably well customizable. Admittedly,
yes.
far more so since OS X hit the scene than it was before. But the folks who complain the most about things missing in macOS, in my experience, haven't used it. Or they just take everything at face value, and they don't take a moment to explore and find out if it's even possible. They just say, not possible, move on, Windows is better.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, cool. Well, good luck to you. You know what? Let's, if you don't mind, I know we were talking about settings and I bounced over to Finder, but while we're in the Finder, you mentioned the favorites section of the sidebar. Let's talk about that, because that is one of the tweaks that I make. It's wonderful how customizable that is. But one of the things that I do is under Finder's settings, I go into General and I turn on Show Hard Disks. Now, I know Apple and Microsoft and everybody turns that off by default, but I just find it incredibly useful to be able to see the drives. And I guess this stems back to when I would have multiple drives within a Mac, multiple physical drives, storage drives within a Mac, which is rare on a laptop, but not so rare on a desktop. And the desktop just to my right has 3 drives, 3 physical drives in it. So to be able to see those drives and get to them more quickly by simply double clicking them is something that I find useful. What do you think about showing the hard disks? I know there's a lot of controversy about that.
I think that's a very good idea, actually. In fact, that's one of the things that is defaulted on some Linux distros, so that when you plug in an external drive, it appears in their equivalent to the Finder, in their equivalent to the sidebar. So yeah, it's an option that is a default on some distributions and not others. But yeah, I think it's a very good idea to have, because normally if you've not got anything plugged in, they're hidden anyway, so nothing shows. So that's great. But as soon as you start plugging in external drives, they'll appear in the sidebar, ready for you to click on and expand into the Finder window and copy from one to the other much more easily and switch back. And then if you're adventurous, you can turn on multiple tags. Not tags, tabbed mode Finder window. So then you can have one drive in one tab or one drive in another tab and go between them. So depending on how adventurous you get with your Finder usage. So as you gain knowledge of using the Mac and you get like more to be more of an expert user, you can start to turn on these features to enhance what you can do, and you'll just discover new things that you didn't even know were possible.
It is super interesting that you brought up the open folders and tabs. I'm not a fan of that, and it's actually one of the things that I turn off. So under Finder settings, there's various tabs, if you will, and the general tab, the very first one, is where you turn on hard disks. Show these items on the desktop. Turn on hard disks is what I turn on. I believe external disks are on by default, but hard disks, they shouldn't call them hard disks anymore, let's be honest, but storage drives.
Storage drives.
Yeah, your primary storage drive. I turn that on. I just find it nice and easy. But there's two other settings on the General tab that I make changes to. And the first one is New Finder Windows Open. New Finder Windows Open by default with recents. And I prefer...
I hate recents.
I don't like recents, so I prefer to go under the general Finder settings. I prefer New Finder Windows to show my home folder. That's what I always default it to. Default it to my home folder because that's generally where I want to be if I'm opening up a new Finder window. A new Finder window.
I don't like to be dropped into the middle of a folder. When I open a Finder, I like to be dropped at the top level of the drive, so I have that set to open all new windows with Macintosh HD, which is again an old name from years gone by, which probably shouldn't be Macintosh HD anymore.
But it's still there. It's fun. I like it.
It's great. I love it. I love it. Still called Macintosh HD, but that's what I start new Finder windows to open with at the top level. I don't particularly like starting a Finder window in several levels lower than the drive that I'm looking at, which always seems weird to me. I don't need to see it from the top. And also recent files view, that just makes me cringe. I can't cope with it.
I don't know how that's useful in any world, but that's me.
No, that's not useful in any world at all.
So I guess the reason I open to my home folder is because that's kind of the center of my world, right? If I'm in my home folder, I have access to my documents. I have access to Dropbox. I have access to iCloud. I have access to movies and music and pictures and what have you. So I kind of like to start
that's what your sidebar is for.
There. True. No, that's true. But if I want to get to my home folder and I'm opening a new Finder window and it starts at Macintosh HD, I have that extra step of opening up users and then again clicking my home folder. But I think both are very valid. It just kind of depends on where you prefer to start. And that's the key. And again, this goes back to the extensibility and the customizability of the Mac, is that not only can you say, start with recents, which nobody should ever do, by the way. No, I'm kidding. Your home folder, Macintosh HD. Some of the other defaults in there are desktop documents and iCloud Drive for those who store everything in iCloud Drive. But there's also an other, and you can completely specify where you would like your Finder windows to open just by changing that setting. Select other, choose the folder you would like to open every single time you open a brand new Finder window, and you're good to go.
And that could be a mounted network drive if you wanted. If you force a mounting to happen every time you turn your Mac on, that's initial true. Opening of Finder could be pointed directly to that.
That's true.
You have to turn your computer on, click Finder, one click, and you see your network files sitting there already.
Yep, exactly.
No clicks.
I don't do anything with tags. I'm not a tagger. I don't tag files.
Funny you should say that. I turn all tags off.
I just don't use them. Now, I know somebody. I know somebody. You may know him too. His name is Brett Terpstra. Fantastic coder, wonderful guy, very smart when it comes to getting into some of the nitty gritty of Spotlight and the Finder and things like that. Makes some fantastic software for the Mac, but he does everything with tags. He doesn't generally create a folder structure. Instead, he uses a tag structure in order to find the content he's looking for on his Mac. And honestly, when I heard him talk about that, I thought, well, that's kind of brilliant. That is really a great way to approach things. But then to think about what I would have to do to undo all the years of organizing things by folder and instead
we're set in our ways.
reorganizing it with tags, I couldn't do it. But oh my gosh, it absolutely was brilliant when I heard him talk about it, because it's so incredibly flexible, and yet it's just not something I can bring myself to do. But I do go to the sidebar. Yeah. I do go to the sidebar, as you mentioned, and I specifically turn on some of the default options that Apple makes available under the favorites. And the one I specifically turn on is my home folder. Okay, I turn that on.
Yep.
But I also do turn on AirDrop, applications, desktop, documents, and downloads. Those are the ones I turn on.
Same here.
Don't turn on movies, music, or pictures. I just don't find that particularly useful. We have apps to get us to those things. We don't necessarily need to be able to browse them in the Finder unless you store a lot of stuff outside those apps, which some people do. But in my particular case, I don't, so I turn those off, or they might even be off by default. And then as far as the rest, under iCloud, I just leave that on. Locations, I leave all of those on. But specifically under favorites, I'll turn those on. And then as you rightly pointed out, you can drag any folder on your Mac to that sidebar and make it available. And the other thing I think people don't realize is that once you have things enabled under favorites, you can drag and drop them and reorder them. So if you don't like if you don't like the fact that applications is on top and documents, I don't even know the order. Applications, desktop, documents. The reason I don't know the order is because I reorder them. I move them around. In any given Finder window, you can drag and drop those items in the left-hand bar. And in my particular case, I put the home folder first, applications, documents, desktop, downloads, AirDrop, and then I add Dropbox to it. I'm still using an older version of Dropbox that does not integrate into it, and it's because they won't allow me to upgrade. There's some file in my Dropbox account that they say is not compatible with Apple's new way of storing stuff.
Yes.
But they don't tell me what the file is. Name. They don't tell me what it is.
One of them is a file name, an illegal file name.
One of them is an illegal file name, but they won't tell me which one it is. If they told me which one it is, I could take care of it.
Oh, no, but it's up to you to find it. That's the trouble.
It's up to me to find it. So I just say, well, then don't upgrade Dropbox. It's fine with me. Anyway, so I keep my Dropbox over there because Dropbox, in my case, does not show up under locations because I'm still running the older version. So that's that. And then the last thing I do is under Advanced. Now, this is where you turn on file name extensions. So Finder Settings Advanced is where you can enable show all file name extensions. I generally don't touch anything else in there except when performing a search. By default, when performing a search, it defaults to search this Mac. And if I am in a Finder window and I'm clicking into the little search box in the top right trying to find a file, I typically want to find that file within that folder or a subfolder of that folder. Yeah. I'm not interested in searching outside of the folder. That's the whole point of using the search box within the Finder window. So I always change this to when performing a search, search the current folder. Now, conversely, if I want to search my entire Mac, I use Spotlight. I hit Command Space or I click Spotlight in the menu bar and I search the entire Mac.
That's a good point.
But if I'm in a folder, I usually want to know where that file is. Within the current folder that you're looking at. In the current folder. So I always change that to search the current folder. But
that's not a bad idea. I might change that setting myself, actually.
But I'll be honest, those are the only tweaks I make to the Finder.
That's pretty much everything I've got written down as well for the Finder. I've got some more settings tweaks and the dock, of course, and the desktop. and very small list of things that I do with a few very essential apps, but nothing much on the app front. But yeah. Shall I jump back into some of the settings that I've got listed?
I want to yes, we'll get to yours. I want to jump to a setting change that I make. This isn't super critical, but I do find myself wanting this on every time. It's under settings, and it's under appearance. And the setting that I changed there is under show scroll bars.
Oh, yes.
I
I
need
like
my
the
scroll
default, so I
bars.
haven't mentioned that. Okay.
I need my scroll
Visible all the
bars.
time.
So I changed show scroll bars to always. Now that's one of the very early tweak settings I make to the Mac. I get why they're not there, but when I do need a scroll bar, when I want to quickly slide up and down,
Wow.
I find it problematic to hover the mouse over there, wait for the scroll bar to appear, try to grab the little bar. It just showing to me all the time.
But
so I leave that on.
Who grabs a scroll bar nowadays, though?
I do. I use it all the time. If I want to quickly jump, if I have a folder that has hundreds and hundreds of files in it, and I want to quickly get to the end of that, it's very easy to grab that scroll bar and just slide down to the bottom. So that's why I do it.
Good point.
And I find myself doing, I do have folders with hundreds and hundreds of, well, Dropbox is a good example, with hundreds and hundreds of files in it. So to me, it's useful to have that scroll bar there. It's also a nice indicator of where I am. Where am I within this document? Where am I within this folder? Where am I within this web page? In theory,
Perhaps
a web page should be infinitely scrolling, but you know, it's nice to know how much more do I have to read. And if I can quickly glance and see it, it's useful to me.
I like the fact that it's hidden unless you need it.
Yes.
So perhaps it's also linked to the fact that I set my mouse speed to be ultra fast, because I think that also affects the scroll speed. So when I've got like hundreds of files in a folder,
it does. Yeah.
It affects the scroll speed. So I only have to stroke a couple of times on the mouse and I'm down to the bottom.
And you're down there. Yeah.
Exactly. So I don't need to click on the scroll bar itself or wait for it to appear.
Yeah.
It just appears as I start to scroll. So yeah. Just two different, completely valid approaches. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the customizability and the personalization of the Mac is what makes me like it so much. It doesn't feel restrictive to me because I can make it work the way I want it to work. But yeah, let's hop on to some of the settings changes that you make, Darren, and let's see how many of these we overlap on.
Cool. Well, yeah, I'm sure we overlap on a few, although this one that I'm about to mention now, I don't think you would have set. This is for people that are very unusual like me. So I'm quite unusual as a Mac user because I very often remote desktop onto a PC.
Sure.
So not very many Mac users do that. But you will find, if you did do such a thing, that Windows is very finicky. It wants its function key row bar to be accessible.
Mm-hmm.
If the default of the Mac is left in as a default, then your function keys will be media controls and do other things like eject to disks and other bits and pieces. Right. So that completely confuses the PC that you're connecting to.
Right.
It doesn't have a clue how to cope with life if you connect to a PC with that setting on. So one of the settings I change is in keyboard, which is to set the function key row to just be pure function keys, so that when you remote onto a Windows machine, the Windows machine doesn't go crazy whenever you press a function key. One of the main things is the key F. This is going to be geeky, a little bit geeky. The key F3 and F5 is absolutely vital to using a PC. So if you haven't got access to those function keys through your Mac through a remote desktop connection, then you can barely use the PC at all. So yeah, that's a must setting set if you are going to be remote desktoping onto other Windows computers. So there you go. Keyboard set function key row.
And I am with you 100%. Now, historically, I may have enabled that for the exact same reason, because historically I did have a stronger need to not only remote into PCs, but also to use terminal emulators. You know, a Wise60 or a Wise50 terminal emulator, when you are connecting in a plain text format to a Unix box, this was a very common way to do it. And if you didn't have your function key row enabled, yes, all kinds of heck broke loose when you tried to connect. So historically, I enabled, and the actual setting is under keyboard shortcuts, and then function keys, and then it's use F1, F2, etc. It actually says etc. Use F1, F2, etc. as standard function keys. So that's the
standard function keys. Yes.
Yeah, that is the setting we're talking about. It's under keyboard shortcuts. It's keyboard shortcuts is a button, and then it's under function keys. And you just have to slide the little slider. It used to be a checkbox, but I think it's slide the little slider now. And then your function key row. Honestly, this is why it was such a big deal when Apple got rid of the function keys and put the touch bar up there and got rid of the escape key. That was disastrous for people. Keys. Oh my gosh, it was awful. Yes. So, you know, this is a great instance of Apple listening and understanding that the function key row is super important to many of its mobile users. And oh my gosh, by the way, so is the escape key. So
yes,
it's so nice to have them back. But even when I had the touch bar on my 2018 MacBook Pro, I would enable the standard function keys, and I just completely ignored the touch bar for anything but a function key bar. That's really what it became on my Mac. Now, here's why I enable it now. And again, this is for historical reasons, but at one point, Apple changed the meaning of those keys up there. In other words, what used to be the mission control key is now a different key. What used to be the show all applications window is now a different key. My muscle memory, my brain, and people who've listened to the show for ages know this already because I've shared this many times before, but my muscle memory knows show desktop is the F11 key. My muscle memory knows that application windows, show application windows, is F10. My muscle memory knows that mission control is the F9, or where the F9 key is on the keyboard. And yes, F12 used to be
is it eject disk?
No. Okay, I just had
something else.
A dashboard. F12.
Oh, dashboard.
Where the F12 key
God,
is, used to be dashboard. So not only do I use F1, F2, etc. as standard function keys, but in that same settings area under keyboard shortcuts, and then mission control, I change how these keys work. So the default key, I changed the default key for mission control to F9. I changed the default key for application windows to F10. And I change, I think show desktop is still F11. I think by default it still is F11, I believe. But that is what I do. So yes, if I want to do anything like adjust the volume, or I want to, like this keyboard I'm sitting at right now, still has a dashboard key on it, for goodness sakes. So you know,
Oh,
if I want to
that's
adjust
nice.
the volume up or down or mute the volume, I just press the little FN key off to the right, or I think on the laptop keyboard it's in the bottom left, right? So I'll just push the FN
Yeah.
key along with that, and then you override the function key definition and go with the original Apple setting. So
Uh,
we're
this
reversing
is
that
why I've turned
process.
on. Yeah, that's right. I mean, I don't use the keys for switching desktops or mission control access or any of the other things. That's why I use all of the turn on all of the optional gestures
Right.
and use multi gestures to do that. So I never use the keyboard or any particular keys to access those modes. It's all through the mouse, all multi gesture mouse control.
Now, here's a bonus. Here's a bonus settings tweak, Darren. Longtime listeners heard me talk about this when this happened. When Dashboard went away, one of the things I used Dashboard for multiple times per day was the calculator. I would
Oh, tell me
press the
about it.
Dashboard
Oh my
key.
God.
There's the
I
calculator.
want the dashboard back.
I do my little calculations, and then I turn off the dashboard, right? And the
Yeah.
beauteous thing about the dashboard calculator is that it remembered the calculations you did before. It would remember them. It would
Yes,
remember
yes.
it would remember the result. So if you did a particularly complex calculation with multiple decimal locations and all that, it would remember, and you could just hit the dashboard and say, oh, what was that number? Okay, there you go, and close the dashboard again. When Apple got rid of the dashboard and they created the calculator widget for the notification center, the problem with that widget is it did not remember calculations. It would kind of reset every time you would go into it.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Is there a calculator widget? Because
There was. I don't know if there is anymore, because here's my
I
bonus
don't
tip.
think there is any more, which is one of my bugbears, actually.
Here's my bonus tip. I purchased the app pCalc. pCalc is
Yes.
amazing. pCalc puts
It's fabulous, yes.
yes, it puts a wonderful icon in your menu bar. You can click that icon and do your calculation and then close it again. Well, because I was so used to pressing F12 to get to the calculator on the dashboard, I reprogrammed, and this is a feature of pCalc, I reprogrammed the keystroke to open the menu bar calculator to F12. So there you go. So now I can still hit F12.
Perfect.
I can do my calculations. I can hit F12 and they go away. And that's my replacement for Dashboard, because that was really the last widget I used in Dashboard on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And
I used to use widgets a lot, and now they have to live on the desktop. I'm not usually a fan of widgets sitting there on the desktop. So
that's the settings we're going to talk about, because I do not put widgets on the desktop. I keep them in Notification Center, if anything. But
that's right.
Yeah.
So do I. But
yeah, they can still live in there.
Yeah, although I don't think they're interactive anymore in the Activity Center. I can't remember what it's called now.
Notification Center. They are
Notification
to an extent.
Center. Yes.
So
I've configured mine quite a bit, but it's not as interactive as widgets used to be, like for a full-on calculator. It seems.
No, not at all.
Maybe I don't know if that's even possible. Whether something third-party like pCalc can enable more interaction when it's acting as an item in that list there. I'm not even sure if that's possible. I don't think it is.
And I did verify, by the way, the horrible calculator widget that they added to the Notification Center is now officially gone. It's not there anymore. I think even Apple realized
it's not there.
Apple realized it was so bad that they had to get rid of it.
Yeah.
But anyway, I only keep a couple things in the Notification Center widgets, and one is the batteries.
Yes, here.
And weather, and then international time. Those are the only things. And international time.
My main ones are I have two calendar entries in there, so I live in the calendar quite a lot. So I have a one calendar overview of the month, and then I have an expanded day view of what's happening on the day. So I have two widgets there, both to the same calendar, but the combination of the two gives me a really big expanded calendar setup in there, which is quite nice to add as a customized widget. But that's the other thing that people may not even realize is part of macOS, that when you click on there and click on edit widgets, there's an extensive list of configurable widgets that you can customize to your heart's content.
That's right. Yeah.
So people don't even know it's there.
A lot of folks don't know it's there. Those who do take advantage of it, but a lot of folks don't. Calendars, I use Fantastical. I also use ItzyCal, and both of those seem to serve the purpose of getting me access to my calendar when I need it. But if we go back to settings changes, Darren, because you and I, like Eric and I, tend to go off the rails and start going down different rabbit holes.
Oh yeah, we've gone all over the place. Yeah.
As we go back to settings, one of the other very early changes I make is actually to Control Center. One of the things I do is I turn on Wi-Fi in the menu bar. I like to have the Wi-Fi.
Yes, so do I. Yeah.
Icon up there. I'm a little mixed on Bluetooth. I like to have Bluetooth up there because I feel that the Bluetooth menu bar item
Bluetooth
is much more useful than the Control Center icon. It takes too many clicks to get to what I need to know about Bluetooth when it's in the Control Center solely. So I do like to enable that on the menu bar. If I run a little short on space, I might turn it off if I run short on space. I do like to have sound.
And there's also one click that you can make then from the Bluetooth menu to go to Bluetooth settings without searching for it. So that's another good feature of having it in the menu bar. But yeah, I do the same. I've got Wi-Fi and Bluetooth in the menu bar. Plus, I also this is part of the I'm jumping all over the place now. But this is part of one of the app tweaks I make, which is the Passwords app has an option in it to add itself to the menu bar, which is what I do as well. So that's very nice to have on the menu bar.
Yes, it does. As far as other Control Center icons, I will show the sound icon. I like to have the sound there in the menu bar.
Same here.
I do not show, I turn off specifically in the menu bar, AirDrop, Stage Manager, Now Playing, and then there are a couple that I turn on when they are active, and that would be focus mode, or do not disturb, as we classically know it. Screen mirroring. If I am mirroring my screen, it's useful to have that up there because you can, on the fly, decide if it's going to be an extended display or if it's going to be a mirrored display. And I like to have display on there as well when active. So that would be the other one that's on when active.
Is that for multi-monitor?
Yeah, there's one I've differed on this one. Since the last time we did these system tweaks, I was pretty firm on keeping this in the menu bar, but I no longer do, and that is fast user switching. I used to always show this in the menu bar, but I find that I'm using fast user switching less and less these days. So I have set fast user switching to don't show in the menu bar, but do show in the Control Center. And the frequency with which I use it these days, and it's a very handy tool to have, fast user switching, but the frequency with which I use it is such that it's fine in the Control Center for me now. I no longer need it in the menu bar, but I did have it in the menu bar all the time. It was such a great way to go to lock your Mac, to switch to another account. There are lots of beneficial reasons to have it there, but as my menu bar got more and more crowded, I
Crowded,
found that
yes.
that was one that I could easily move to Control Center.
Live without, yeah, exactly. It can live one extra click through from the other.
Yeah.
And don't you just love the cube animation? I mean, I have it just turned on just
oh
for
my
that.
Gosh.
So just to see that.
Absolutely. That was mind-blowing animation when Apple introduced it
back in the day. Absolutely. When I first saw that, I nearly fell off my stool.
It's just amazing. Now, there is a section in Control Center called Menu Bar Only. And I do show under Menu Bar Only, I do show Spotlight in the menu bar. I do not show Siri. I cannot think of any time in my history of using the Mac where I've ever invoked this feature of the Mac, and I just find it to be a waste of space up there.
And you said it.
I know. And I do typically enable Time Machine because I do have backup drives connected to my Mac, and I do let Time Machine backups run. And I do find it very handy to have that up there so that not only can I see if a backup's actually running, but I can also check the status of my backups by just clicking that icon and not having to dig through every time I want to get to it. So I do keep that there. Now, the last thing, and then I'll let you reflect on your Control Center tweaks, but the last thing here is, if any differ, I should say, is clock. Under Menu Bar Only Clock, there's a button now for clock options, and I will admit that I do allow the date to show. I like to have the date available to me up there in the top right. Yeah. I do typically enable day of the week. I don't know why I can't.
So do I, yeah.
I don't know why I can't retain what day of the week it is without seeing it up there.
It's good to know what day it is.
It's good to know what day it is. I do leave it to digital. Eric and I have talked about this in the past. I see somewhat limited utility to switching it to analog, but he raised a very good point about why it might be useful. So cool. But one thing that I do always enable, even on other people's Macs, is I turn on flash the time separators.
Oh, I see.
And there's a simple reason. It's not to count the seconds. It's to tell if your Mac is truly hung. If those flash...
Well, that's a good point.
Yes.
I like it.
If those time separators are no longer flashing, your Mac is
then you've got a hung Mac. Exactly.
Super tight.
Good point.
As long as they're flashing, there's always hope that you can recover it.
There's hope.
if they're not flashing, your Mac, it just ain't coming back again.
Abandon all hope.
Abandon all hope, ye who enter here the time. But
exactly.
That is the sole reason I enable time separators, is simply, or to flash the time separators, simply so that I know if the Mac is actively working, if it's thinking, if it's doing what it should be doing in the background, then there's hope for getting it back. That
makes sense.
So that's why I enable that setting. Anything else in Control Center that you change?
Well, no, it's funny because going through what you were saying about Control Center specifically, I have virtually exactly the same as you. The only other thing I've turned on is the new weather app also allows you to put the weather in the bar, which is quite nice actually, which I've started to do because we're obsessed with the weather in the UK. So I've enabled that. And I also do have Spotlight and Siri enabled on the bar as well. I actually do use Siri occasionally, and I think Siri gets a bit of a bad rap because you can say things like, show me that image file I was working on last week.
Here's what I found on the web.
I think it was something to do with this. And I've had quite a good success with it actually, with it showing me documents that I worked on previously. But admittedly, you are right. At the moment, it is rather simplistic requests that you can make of Siri. But one day we'll make a convert of you, and you'll end up using Siri because all the fancy AI features will come down the road in a few versions' time, and you'll be just happily speaking to Siri there conversationally, and all sorts of wonderful things will happen.
Yes, you've nailed you've nailed it, Darren. That's exactly what's going to happen. I did note I don't turn on the show weather in the menu bar, and it's not because I don't necessarily find it useful. It's again, it's just one of those things. It's taking up a little bit more room than I would like it to take in the menu bar, and I do otherwise have the weather widget set up in Notification Center. So to me, it's kind of redundant info.
It can be shown elsewhere. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do like how it's presented in the menu bar. It's quite nice how they present it. It's very nicely presented.
Yeah, it is nice, but it's it's like some of these other things. I've just in my usage, I feel as if it's just taking a little extra space, a little more space than I needed to. So I just turn it off. But yeah, it is a neat new feature. Sequoia, that is a Sequoia specific feature, and it I guess to have the weather at a glance like that is handy.
Especially in the UK.
Now, I am going to get to a little bit of a controversial thing here. Maybe.
Uh-oh.
Maybe it's not as controversial as it used to be when it was new. But on the Mac, under Settings, under Desktop and Dock, one of the very first things I do is I turn off Click Wallpaper to reveal desktop. I do not like that feature.
Oh, yes.
So
I hate that setting as well. I do exactly the same.
I change it to only in Stage Manager. Now, I guess that in and of itself is not controversial, but what I do is under Desktop and Stage Manager, I turn off Show Items in Stage Manager. I turn on Show Items on Desktop, and then I turn off Stage Manager. I just do not find Stage Manager useful, and I turn it off. Now, one of the things I didn't mention when I talked about keyboard shortcuts is on some of my Macs, I do set up the F3 key as a turn on or off Stage Manager key. But honestly, I don't use it. It's just one of those things I don't think about. I don't use it, and so why keep it on? I just turn it off. And then similarly, under widgets, this is under Settings, Desktop and Dock. Under widgets, I turn off Show Widgets on Desktop, and I turn off Show Widgets in Stage Manager. I just don't use them on the desktop.
That's exactly the same settings I have.
Yeah.
And for the same reasons as well. I don't get on with Stage Manager, but then it's probably because I make such extensive use of mission control in spaces. I don't need Stage Manager sort of gets in the way for me. However, I have seen other people that don't know about spaces and can't quite grok how to interact with spaces and use them properly anyway. And for them, Stage Manager can be quite a good single screen situation for like doing something similar to what you would do with Stage Manager, but without using spaces, but without using it and using Stage Manager. So it suits some people, but I do exactly the same thing. I've got the same settings as you, so it's not particularly controversial, I think, because the only confusion is that the Mac UI offers you several ways of doing the same thing, and it can be a bit overwhelming and confusing to new users because they think, what's the best way to achieve this? And they might go down one rabbit hole and think, oh, I don't quite like this, not realizing there's a different rabbit hole that they could have gone down as well. So it can be a bit tricky to choose the best way to use your Mac because there's quite a few options and different ways of using it in the UI. So it suits some people, definitely down to the ground, but it certainly doesn't suit me or it sounds like yourself.
I think you hit the nail on the head when you talked about all of the features available to users of the Mac and the ability to customize our experience, to make that experience a personal one. The mistake, I don't know if it was a mistake as such, but we had these amazingly powerful tools at our disposal already in mission control. And
which is amazing. I love mission control.
And spaces. Mission control and spaces provide, I would argue, better functionality than Stage Manager does.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it is to me. But
the division line seems to be those who have adopted and made mission control and spaces a part of their daily life, and those who did not. Those who did not, I think, are benefiting from Stage Manager, and those who did don't understand the usefulness of Stage Manager. And I think that's really what it comes down to, is where in this personal user experience of the Mac do you fall? Where on this line do you fall? If you are in that mission control spaces camp, you just don't see the utility of Stage Manager. You might adopt it. Yeah. You might say, gosh, I like that better. I want to switch to that. But
well, that's the difficulty. It's part of the discovery.
Yeah.
And I think one of the slightly tricky things is that it's great in a way. The implementation, I think, of mission control is wonderful, but it is hidden.
Yeah.
So potentially some people don't even know it's there. Whereas Stage Manager would likely be a little bit more visible to people. But I think if people are more used to using a single monitor and they never invoke spaces or mission control, or for people who use dual monitors and dual physical displays and just have a single fixed displays, then Stage Manager can be quite useful for them.
Yeah. Okay.
But I turn it all off.
We turn it all off. It's useful, but we don't use it. I do set my default web browser to Firefox, by the way. I don't know if you change your default web browser or not, but I do set my default.
I'm sort of married into Safari. I've fully adopted. I've drinking the Kool-Aid. I'm fully adopted the Safari life.
Yep. And you very nicely covered already the changes you make to mouse and trackpad, but I'll just mention a few of the things that I do. Most of the settings I leave on, I leave at their defaults, but I do turn off natural scrolling, and we'll talk about that at the end of the show. I have an important comment on that for those who maybe like natural scrolling on the trackpad but don't like it on the mouse. We'll talk about that. I do turn off natural scrolling. I do turn on secondary click on the right side of the mouse when I'm configuring the mouse. And then on the trackpad, like you, I turn on tap to click, and I turn on secondary click with 2 fingers. And then I turn off force click and haptic feedback. That has gotten in my way more often than not. I mean, I understand the utility of it, but I like to click and drag with the trackpad. And I've explained this before, and it's a little hard to explain, but I will click with my thumb. I'll select some files, I'll click with my thumb, and then while I'm clicking, while I'm holding down with my thumb, I'll use my finger to move those files around.
Well, that's advanced.
that process of clicking and holding with the thumb typically invokes the force click and haptic feedback, and then that interrupts my file moving and copying process. So that's why I turn that off, and it is one of those things that gets in my way. One last settings tweak along these lines, anyway, is under accessibility. This goes back to something we talked about earlier when I talked about adding the path button to the toolbar in Finder.
Yeah.
Under accessibility, under display, and under show window title icon. So let me explain what a Windows title icon is. If you have the Finder window open and you are in your home folder, it'll typically have your username as the name of that home folder. And that username or that name of the folder you're in, whatever folder you're in, that name will appear in the top of your Finder window. And Back in the day, there used to be a little icon next to that name, and that is called a window title icon. And that's useful because with that icon there,
Yes.
you can hold down the command key and click that icon
And click it.
and you'll get your path. It'll show you the path where you are in the Finder. Well, if you don't go into accessibility and you don't turn on show window title icons, you can get it to appear, but it takes a little extra fraction of a second. You have to hover your mouse cursor there and then it will appear, and then you can press command and click and do what you did before. At some point, and I don't remember which version of macOS this was, but at some point Apple decided we did not need those window title icons and they turned them off by default. Thankfully, under accessibility, they allow us to turn them back on again. And that is what I do. I turn them on because that little extra hesitation has caused issues for me. And I just like to have the icon there and give me something to click. Give me a target to click, you know? And so
funny you should say that.
That's why I enable those.
I've turned on exactly the same setting. And I also turn another setting on in that accessibility menu. It's the same sort of area for window titles, and that is button shapes.
Oh, which, interesting.
Normally, the shapes of the buttons don't exist, so you only see the back. For instance, the back arrow type thing to go backwards, whereas you don't see the whole of the button target. So if you turn on button shapes, that draws a shape around the target so that you can see the extent of the button and where the button is. It also helps that if you want to move the button around, you can click on the right thing to move. Else if you don't see the button shape there, when you try to move it, you don't know what you're clicking on.
Interesting.
So yeah, button shapes was just a little extra accessibility setting in the same area that I turn on as well. But yeah, I've also got window icon titles turned on too. Yeah.
And so, oh yes, okay, that's right. That's actually right next to the window title icons. Yep. I just pulled it up.
It's right there.
Toolbar
That's
button
it.
shape. And yeah, so what?
It's very subtle. It's quite subtle.
What you're doing effectively is enabling a classic look to the Finder.
A little bit, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, where we had this where you could see the shapes of the buttons all the time.
The shapes of the buttons. We used to be able to see the shapes of the buttons all the time, and this turns that into that setting.
Yeah, now
nice. I find it nice. But
it is nice because now you only see those shapes when you hover over the button or when the button might be selected. Like, for example, when you change the view from icon view or you change to list view or something, the button for list view might be highlighted. But the
button shape also changes. So if you click on it, it highlights, so it changes color, I believe, when you click on it. So that was also quite a nice indicator that you have clicked on something.
That is.
So, I just find that quite a nice little tweak.
Kind of cool, and it is kind of a little retro throwback to previous versions of OS X.
That's
Very
right.
Nice.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Kind of before Johnny Ive simplified everything. You know.
Yes.
We don't need button shapes.
Johnny Ive.
Yeah, we don't need those button shapes. We'll just yeah. No, that's pretty cool. I like that. I like that a lot. So those are some of the tweaks I make to settings. I think I've covered pretty much everything that I do within settings. Is there anything else in settings that you tweak other than the dock? We'll talk about the dock in just a moment.
I do have some more settings tweaks. This is quite extensive, isn't it? Our combined settings are quite extensive, aren't they? There's quite a lot. There's a bit of overlap, but it's.
I don't recommend people make all these settings changes. They're going to have they're going to have to play with some of these and see what works best for them.
That's it. It's all part of the discovery.
That's right.
It's best not to just blindly go in and turn our settings on. It's good to experiment with each one and discover which one suits you best and which set of settings that you find that you're most at home with.
Yeah.
So there's a few more that I set. So I do turn simple ones. I do turn off 24-hour time. I just massively dislike 24-hour time, so I turn that off, so I can see lovely old-fashioned AM and PM.
That's probably on by default for you, isn't it?
No, it isn't actually. It defaults to 24-hour time for us, I
For
believe.
you,
So I
yeah.
always have to turn that
That's what
off.
I mean.
Yeah.
For
I see.
you,
So it's not the
24-hour
default for you.
time is the default.
Is a default.
For
Yes, I believe it
us,
is.
AM PM is the default.
Wow. I
Yeah.
need to be American now, you see.
Well,
I prefer the American way.
Or just when you set up the Mac, tell it you're in the US and not in the UK.
Oh dear, I could do that. Yes, that's a very good point. So there's a few other there's a couple of other accessibility options which are quite small ones. One is setting the modifier key for zoom. So it allows me to zoom into the screen and
Yes.
with a scroll action. So that's quite a nice thing to have, be able to turn on. Not necessarily because I can't see the screen as such, but I do like to zoom in to check things. And also when you're doing a screen grab, if you're doing a highly accurate screen grab, if you do it whilst you are zoomed in, you can get a very nice accurate screen grab out of that as well. So turning on the display modifier for zooming, that's quite a nice. Oh yes, including a nice little side tip there as well.
Yeah. You're right. I do enable that. I do enable that myself. I do change it to the control key. Yes. Yep. You're right.
That's it. Yes. Can use the control key to zoom in and out of your desktop, which is quite nice.
Yeah.
The other one I turn on is turn on speak selection. And one of it's another accessibility feature. One of the reasons I do that is if I'm writing something, it's quite easy when you're reading back what you've written to miss a mistake or two. So I find if I get my Mac to talk back to me to narrate what I've written, then it's much easier for me to hear a problem or a mistake with what I've written, with possibly the grammar or how I've written something, or something is not quite pronounced. It's like, oh, did I spell that right? So it really helps with editing things I'm writing if I turn on speak selection, because I can just get my Mac to narrate what I've written back to me, and it's a really good way of showing up any errors in what I've written, especially in because it's conversational, especially in things like grammar. Maybe I've got my grammar wrong that I've written something in, and when it's spoken back to me, it's like, oh, that doesn't make sense. The grammar's all wrong. I'll need to rewrite that bit.
And
so I use it as a writing tool, a writing aid.
And I had it in my head that was something you could always invoke with a context menu, like a right click or through the menus. But I was just looking as you were describing that and realized it's not. You do have to enable it. I believe you have to enable it under accessibility. Otherwise, it doesn't show up. That's interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, if you don't enable that and you select some text, then when you right click on it to say speak selection, the modifier key just helps you to enable speak selection, but that also means you can speak anything, not just stuff you've written, but other stuff that you are looking at. And now, of course, since you can directly select text from images through lovely AI features, we're able to speak the selection of text that is embedded into images now as well, which is quite a nice little accessibility feature, I think. So,
I know why I was confused. I don't know if this is a tip or just an expansion of what you were talking about, but even without speak selection turned on under accessibility, some apps on the Mac do allow you to start speaking the selected text.
Yes.
So, for example, I had some text selected in my browser and there was no option to speak that text. But I copied and pasted that text into TextEdit, selected it, and then when I right-clicked under speech, there's start speaking. So without that turned on, you might find that feature available here and there.
To certain applications, exactly. Yeah.
But if you want it enabled system-wide, follow Darren's tip and turn that setting on.
Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Wonderful. I like that.
Excellent. I also turn on appearance dark mode as nature intended.
Oh,
I know you're not a massive fan of dark mode.
Oh my gosh.
Love dark mode. So everything on all my systems is dark. I love dark mode, so that's a must. Turning on dark mode. I have another little few ones. On the lock screen, I have a require password immediately after locking. So as a security feature, not that there's anyone milling around here that will jump on my Macs, but just as a standard setting I've got used to setting all the time. So if my machine locks and I wander off, then my password is required to go back into my session. Else someone else can jump in there and do their own nefarious things. So so I turned that on. What else have I got? So registering Touch ID. Luckily, my fingerprints still work nicely, so I've got a Touch ID keyboard, which I find really, really handy. And then the only other thing I've got in settings is the big one in the Internet Accounts section, but that's very dependent on what types of accounts you set up. And what I do is I individually set each one of those account types to sync the account type of thing I only want it to sync. So for instance, I don't double things up. It gets very confusing. Say for instance you have 3 services that will all allow you to save contacts. If you enable all of them, then God knows which entry at which point entered which contact in which contact database for which service. So I keep it all to one item for everything, so that also it means that when you're logging into webmail or some other services, all your contacts are still there. But I know the Mac is quite nice because it can amalgamate contacts from lots of locations and treat it as if it's all in one place. But that can be very, very confusing.
It's such a bad thing.
So I don't do that.
It's such a bad thing, Darren. We've talked about this on the show before. It can cause
bad habits. Yeah, that's it.
I feel that there's a very large missed opportunity when it comes to this. And that is when you add an internet account, by default, right now, Apple turns everything on. If you add a Yahoo account, a Google account, an Apple account, a Microsoft account, it automatically enables contacts, calendars, notes, whatever is compatible, it enables it. And that is such a big mistake, and it causes so much confusion among users.
You can get into a mess.
The missed opportunity is that when you enable an internet account, I guess it's okay if it defaults to enabling mail, but it should pop up and say, would you like to enable these other services? Not enable them by default, but enable them optionally. And I think that is a big usability issue with the internet accounts on Mac. As great as they are, as wonderful it is that the Mac has everything you need to integrate with contacts and calendars and notes and what have you from all these fantastic services out there.
That's it.
The missed opportunity is that Apple needs to ask. Just ask. Just pop up an extra box that says, would you like to enable the calendar for this new account you just added?
That would be a good plan to prompt by default for that, because it does confuse people. You're right.
Chances are the answer is no. Chances are that the answer is, I have my contacts syncing to iCloud. I don't need them syncing to Outlook. I don't need them syncing to
the only problem is some people don't know where in fact, quite a few people I've met
That's a big problem.
Don't know where their things are syncing to.
Absolutely a big problem. I have spent so much time sorting out clients
happily syncing, but they're all over the place.
It's crazy. It really is a mess. It's a mess.
It can become a mess. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. And that's a good reminder that when you add internet accounts, it's important to go through and ask yourself, do I really need these services enabled? And if you don't, turn them off. And the worst case scenario, absolute worst case scenario is that you turn it off and realize that you turned off something that you need. And the nice thing about having them on is that if your goal is to consolidate everything within a single account, if your goal is to consolidate all your contacts into iCloud or all your contacts within a Google account or what have you, the Contacts app on the Mac is an amazingly easy way to do that. You just enable contacts or calendars. You can do this with calendars too. Enable contacts for the accounts you want to merge and literally drag and drop your contacts from one account to the other, and they're over. You cannot do that on the phone. You can't do it on the phone. You can't do it on the web, but you can do it on the Mac. It's a wonderful, wonderful feature of macOS.
Absolutely, yeah. You do have to be careful when you're adding multiple internet accounts to understand which services under each account that you are syncing, and make sure you don't cross the streams too drastically, or else you can get into some very confusing messes. So don't cross the streams.
Nice Ghostbusters reference. Nice Ghostbusters reference right there.
Exactly.
Okay, short of the dock, because I have a couple comments about the dock, but short of the dock, are there any other settings changes you would like to mention?
I think that is my entire list of settings. So I've gone through with you the Finder tweaks you mentioned. We're all good with that. I've mentioned everything I've got written down with settings tweaks as well. So yeah, we're on to dock and desktop now.
Okay. Well,
I believe
you, Darren, were convinced that we were going to differ on the function key setting in keyboard, and yet we're on that 100%. However, I'm reasonably certain we're going to differ on this next thing. But let me get through this. Let me get through my comments, and then we'll see if we differ or not. One thing that's interesting about the dock is how many different ways you can configure it. Not unlike the Mac. We talked about the personalization. We talked about the customization of the Mac, but the dock is just as personalizable as the Mac is. And look, I am quite happy with the dock at the bottom of my screen. However, it seems, and this is where I think we're going to differ, it seems that there are others who bristle at the mere mention of the dock anywhere but on the side of their screen. I know Eric is one of those people, and I just recently learned, much to my chagrin, so is my dad. Now, one of the things I do first, I keep my dock at the bottom, but one of the things I'll do is I'll slightly reduce the size of the dock. And the reason I slightly reduce the size, and this is under settings and desktop and dock, but it can also be done from the dock itself, which I'll talk about. But I reduce the size of it, and that's to better handle all the apps that I'm going to cram into it later. I do put a fair number of apps on it. The apps I put on the dock do vary based on the Mac I'm using at any given moment, but I do put a fair number on there. Then, and you talked about the cube rotation earlier, Darren. I love the magnification feature of the dock. Absolutely love it. And I will enable that magnification. It's not on by default, but it's one of those features that I saw when the Mac when OS X was first introduced, and I just fell in love with it, and I keep it on. It's not on by default, but I turn that on. I love magnification. One, I just think it's cool, and for two, it makes finding apps easier when there's a bunch of them to scroll through. Though I guess I'll admit muscle memory plays a little bit into that as well. Now, what I will do next, though, is I will take a few whacks at the default apps that Apple puts on there. I don't use a good majority of them, and I remove them. And for me, that is Launchpad, it's Safari, it's Mail, it's Maps, it's FaceTime, it's Freeform, it's TV, it's News, it's Keynote, and it's Numbers. I know where to find them. They're in the applications folder. I'll talk about that in just a second, but I don't need them on my dock all the time. That's where the right side of the dock comes into play, because on the right side of the dock, by default these days, Apple plops the downloads and trash there. That's it. They put downloads and trash, which is cool. I mean, it's amazing how many people don't know where files go when they download them through the web browser. On the Mac, it's easy. It's right there in the dock. There's your downloads folder. Just about any browser that I've used on the Mac knows to put your downloads there. Wonderful. It's great to have that there. But I like to add my home folder and I like to add the applications folder. Yeah. I treat the applications folder on the dock as an app launcher. So each of those, I'll drag it from Macintosh HD. In the case of applications, I drag it from Macintosh HD to the right side of the dock. And by right side of the dock, I mean to the right of that vertical line that you see when you look at your dock. Drag it to the right side of the dock. It doesn't matter where on the right side you put it, but I typically put it first right after that line. And then
just as long as you don't drag it to the bin.
Until you don't drag it to the bin, which hopefully it would prompt and say, "Are you sure you want to do this?" But there you go.
Hopefully.
But I put it just to the right of that line. I set it to folder view, and I do that by right clicking or control clicking it and choosing display as folder. And then the next thing I do is I set it to grid view, which again, you right click it or control click it and view content as a grid. Now, I also sort it by name. You might sort it by kind, but I sort it by name. So what this does, by putting the applications folder on the right side of my dock, it gives me an app launcher. I know we have Launchpad, but I got rid of that. I don't like Launchpad. So I click the applications folder. It's in grid view. My apps are in alphabetical order, and it gives me a way to quickly launch any one particular app on my Mac, including those that I've removed from the dock because I don't need them on a daily basis. So that's my applications folder. I'll also put my home folder, and I'll do the same thing. I will set it to display as a folder, and I will set it to grid view for that. That's really about it. Now, I did talk about resizing the dock, and I talked about turning on magnification. Both of those things can be done in your settings under desktop and dock, but you can also do it by interacting with the dock itself. I mentioned that vertical bar over on the right. If you hover your cursor over that vertical bar, you'll see it change to an up-down arrow, and you can click and drag to resize your dock larger or smaller. The other thing you can do with that line on the right of your dock is you can right-click it, and you can turn hiding on. You can turn magnification on or off. You can change the position of your screen, which again, that shouldn't even be an option. And you can decide whether you want to minimize apps using a particular effect. And again, I fell in love with that Genie effect when Apple introduced it way back in 2001. And I keep the Genie effect on as the minimize feature. But now that I've shared how I customize the dock, Darren, I know the very first thing you're going to say is that it absolutely belongs on the right and or left side of the screen. But take it away. What are your dock customizations?
Well, interestingly, my dock setup is quite similar to yours, except I put mine on the correct side of the screen or the correct location.
That's just wrong.
It does make sense. Well, to me, of course, it does. I set the dock to the left-hand side.
Yeah. I think most people do.
Desktop icons are for the right-hand side. The dock is always on view, so I don't like docks that hide and come back on and so on. I like it to be always in view.
Me too.
But it's set to the left-hand side, and that makes sense because every single display nowadays is widescreen.
Right.
So whatever you put at the bottom of the screen, you're cutting off a chunk of your scrolling potential there, and you have to scroll more, and you can see less of your document on screen or whatever you're working on, for instance. So by placing and most documents, at least, are in a portrait view. So unless you're working on landscape things all the time, it makes sense to have your dock on the left, which frees up a lot of, all of the vertical space for you to use for your content that you're creating. So to me, it makes sense to have your dock on the left. But
I've heard that false argument before, Darren. I've heard that false argument. I don't.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. I get that. I understand the logic of that. I feel it cuts off the horizontal window sizing when I do that.
It depends which is most important, horizontal or vertical.
And I prefer the horizontal, but I will also mention one more settings tweak that I make that I neglected to mention, and it really only applies to Mac laptops, and that is under settings and displays. I always set my display to more space. I never leave it at the default. So in effect, I set it to the maximum resolution of that screen versus the default. So I always have a lot of screen real estate to play with. Right. And that's why I do that.
I see what you mean.
Now,
that could work, yes.
The other thing I do on a laptop, and I guess I should have mentioned this, but I don't like the notch. I do not like the notch. It bugs the heck out of me. So what I do is under displays where you see that option to do more space or the default or whatever, you can right click and you can say show as list, and then you can show all resolutions. And when you do that, there is always an option that is just slightly smaller vertically than the default. And when you choose that option, what happens is your menu bar appears below the notch. You effectively turn the notch off. It's still there, but you're turning it off.
Yeah.
Because you are...
So you're removing part of your screen effectively.
You're right. But to me, that part of the screen's already gone. It's because of the notch, and I lose that space to put menu bar icons. I take the trade-off of, what is it? It's like 40 pixels. It's like 45 pixels, I think
it's not big. Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, I look at it differently in that I would have extra space either side of the notch, just a little bit of extra space. So rather than seeing it as space I don't have and obscured, I see it the other way around to say there's a little bit in the middle, but then there's extra space on the sides. So I look at it as a gain rather than a loss.
Yeah. Yeah. See, it's just perspective, but the inability to see all of my menu bar icons and the ineffectiveness of third-party apps to properly display and hide menu bar icons, they just never work right for me. It was a better option for me to forego those 45 pixels and just go with a slightly lower resolution. And it's only lower in the vertical. It's not lower in the horizontal. So I'm really only losing 45 pixels of vertical space.
I see what you're doing. That's yeah.
And I'm willing to put up with that. But the proper location of the dock aside, what other tweaks do you make?
Cool. Yeah, I'll have some more. So like yourself, I remove items from the dock that are defaults that aren't needed. So for instance, I remove settings, Launchpad, music, App Store, etc. Especially settings and App Store, because it duplicates. Yeah. Because from the Apple menu, you have always available an ability to get to your settings menu and the App Store. So there's no need for them to have an icon on the dock taking up room on your dock because you've already got access to it elsewhere. So it's more of a duplication. So I get rid of those. I'll have to send you a picture of what I've got on my dock. Actually, it could be quite interesting to compare what we have on our docks. I logically group all of the items on the dock. So
me too.
I have
I like that.
Apple type apps in one place. I have all the communication apps together. I have all the artistic apps together, and I have all the remote control apps together. So they're not flung around all over the place in random locations on the dock. There's some order to it.
Yes,
absolutely, nice and ordered. So and I do the same thing. Actually, no, I do something different. So instead of having the genie effect, I change to the scale effect, which I like better. The genie effect looks nice, but I find it quite slow. So I like the scale effect being faster. It still looks good, and I definitely miss what used to be in a couple of Mac OSs before, which was the Shift key modifier. Do you remember that when
slow it down?
Yes, to slow it down, because that used to be a really good thing. So when you had the genie effect selected, and you used the Shift key to invoke it and slow the animation down, it was really, really impressive to see all the subtle changes and zooms and crossfades and that happen in that animation, running it slowly. And I missed that. That's gone now. I think it's the last two OSs. It was got rid of a couple of OSs ago. I can't remember now.
I honestly didn't know it was gone. And knowing that it's gone, I only miss it because it was an incredible way to demonstrate, as you said, what was happening.
Yeah, you can really show off what's to new Mac users. Yeah.
And I think that was really the only reason for it to be there, quite frankly.
Absolutely. If that Shift key effect was available to slow it down, then I would switch back to the genie effect. And I do the same thing that you mentioned a few times ago, but in a different setting area, which is turning off the clicking the wallpaper to reveal the desktop, which is just turn that off. The same thing you mentioned as Stage Manager, we've gone through that automatically. Oh yes, the other thing I change is because I use spaces, I generally have 4 spaces, and they are static. I like them to be static, and so the default option is to automatically arrange spaces as your usage of each space changes, which I find very confusing, because one space will move to a different place to another space depending on your usage. So I turn that feature off to specifically say automatically arrange spaces, and set it to keep to a set order. So that makes things much less confusing or using spaces. That could possibly be one of the reasons why some people use spaces when they first try to use it, because it may automatically rearrange your space's content, and people get very lost to think, what on earth has just happened? So they perhaps don't know that they can turn that off.
That's under Desktop and Dock, and that is the automatically rearrange spaces based on recent use, right? Yeah. So you turn that off.
To recent use, exactly. Yeah. So I turn that off. So I keep it to a set order, which then, well, it's the only option that makes sense to me. Else spaces would be a bit confusing.
That makes a ton of sense.
What else do I do?
What about displays have separate spaces? What do you think about that?
I don't have multiple displays, so I would probably investigate that on a multi-display setup before deciding which way to go on that one. Because in a way, you could go either way with that. So it depends on your usage of multi-desktop. So one of the reasons I got into using spaces a lot is the fact that I very rarely have machines with multiple displays, except 1 or 2 PCs at work. But
honestly,
Mac-wise, I very rarely don't have. It's usually a single display. But I think the versatility of spaces is so good, and how it's implemented is so nice, that I actually think I'd prefer it. So rather than having 4 physical screens surrounding me, I think I would rather have one big screen and 4 virtual desktops. It's just much nicer and easier setup that I would like to use, rather than actual physical displays. Even if I had the option of plugging in external displays on my Mac, I don't think I would. I'd still prefer the virtual desktop route rather than physical desktop.
There are definitely times a second display is useful. And as I was hearing you describe that and thinking about the usage of spaces, let's assume you have two displays. And if you have it set up where displays do not have separate spaces, then the maximum number of working spaces that you have is your two displays plus the additional spaces you created. So if you create two additional spaces,
yes.
that would be four, working zones or working spaces, if you will. But
yes.
if each display, by default, each display has separate spaces. So if you set up two spaces on your primary display and two spaces on your secondary display, now you've got six. So I definitely understand why that's the default. And if you're a very heavy spaces user, I could see where having separate spaces for each display would be useful. But I can also see where it could be potentially confusing. So
confusing.
I think I agree with you that if you're a heavy spaces user, how you set that really depends on your own workflow and what's going to work best for you.
That's it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just experiment. You just got to try it.
Yeah.
What else? I think, where am I going? Oh, that's it. Yes. So that was my final thing. Well, one thing I do make sure is, and this is a little bit geeky, I don't think anyone else does this, is my virtual desktops I set up with individual wallpapers. But what I do is I grab, create a super wide wallpaper, like 16,000 pixels, 17,000 pixels, really wide. And I unfortunately you can't. I can understand why Apple doesn't let you do this, because there's too many options for it to go wrong with the combination of what you can do with spaces and also multiple monitor modes and so on. It can get rather confusing. But one of the things you can do in Windows that you can't do in macOS is to assign a spanning wallpaper on screen 1 that then flows across into screen 2 and screen 3 and screen 4 and so on. So the Mac, what I have to do for the Mac is to split the wallpaper, the super wide wallpaper, up into 4, and then apply each one individually to each desktop. But that does mean that when I go into Spaces mode, I've got a lovely 4-monitor virtual space with a spanning wallpaper that flows from one space to another, and it looks rather fantastic. So yeah, I do spend some time. It's a bit silly of me really, but I do spend time making that aesthetically as perfect as possible to make a lovely spanning wallpaper that goes across all of my virtual desktops.
The spanning wallpaper is an interesting problem. I hadn't thought about that. I really thought where you were going to go was with spanning a window across displays, which by default you cannot do on the Mac, but there is an option to enable it. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to save that for a tip for a future episode, because it's a really good tip. And I think that some folks might benefit from knowing how to do it. It's something that I enable on some of my Macs. For example, this one right here, I have it enabled on because I do have a second display. And sometimes it's handy to have a window that straddles both displays. But I'm going to save that for a future tip. And
lovely.
Yeah, we'll keep that on a future episode. Moving on from the general macOS settings, I think this will be a really quick discussion, or at least I hope it will be. But what about must-have apps? Because the last thing that I do is I do install some key apps on each new Mac that I configure. And as I looked through the list, it actually kind of looked like a who's who of essential apps for new Mac users. But some of the highlights of what I install include Firefox for web browsing, Thunderbird for email, Dropbox for sharing files between Macs and friends and business colleagues. I now install Joplin for keeping important notes at hand. I used to install Evernote all the time. Now I've switched over to Joplin.
Okay.
Though I will admit that Joplin has been sharing the stage with Apple's Notes app these days. Notes has been getting better and better, and I'm splitting my digital brain into two parts. Some of them, especially historical information, is in Joplin, and newer stuff is going into Notes. But I kind of straddled the line there. But I no longer install Evernote. If I want a third-party note-keeping app, it is now Joplin, which is a free open source app. I do install Strongbox, which is a password keeping app that is installed to help ensure that my passwords stay in sync between my Macs and my mobile devices. Some sort of password keeping app, and again, this is a new development in the macOS world, but having some sort of password keeping app is absolutely essential when setting up a new Mac. And yes, there is now a passwords app on the Mac, but I kind of feel as if it's not quite where Strongbox and 1Password and Bitwarden are quite yet. So for now, I install Strongbox. And then with Apple now pre-installing Pages and Numbers and Keynote, that's about it. I mean, yes, I do install other apps like Affinity Photo and Designer and Publisher. I used to install MailPlane all the time, and what I am switching over to is going to be a future essential app, so we'll save that for a future episode. I do often install Handbrake and VLC.
Handbrake.
Final Cut. There's other apps like Microsoft Office that I use on a fairly regular basis. But if I just want to get the darn Mac working, the apps I mentioned, including Pages, Numbers, and Keynote, are all I need. That's all I need to be an effective Mac user. I don't need those extra apps. But what about you? Are there any must-have apps that you put on a brand new Mac?
Yeah, I've got a few, but since I've migrated to a lot of Apple native things, my list is shorter than yours actually. So for instance, I use Apple Mail, so I don't need to install Mail Client. I use Safari, so I don't need to install the browser and configure it. And I use extensive use of notes. So like you were saying with Evernote, I've moved all of my notes over from the various places I had different notes in, and they're all consolidated now in the Notes app, and I really like the Notes app. And I also use the Apple's password manager, which is very new. So it's early days yet, but I think it's going from strength to strength, and I don't see many downsides to using that. It's true that some people say that that there's it's true that there is missing functionality in there. However, it makes sense that some things aren't there. So, for instance, secure notes. The best place to store a secure note is the Notes app, which does secure notes. So you don't need it in your password manager. It's only there in 1Password because of his history and the fact that we didn't have a good secure notes system. But now we do. There's no issue. So I've got lots and lots of things that I use native to the Mac itself, so I don't need to install any of those things or configure any of those things as well. So that's quite makes it quite quick and easy to set up a new Mac if you're me. But I do install a few things. So like I said before, I do a lot of remote desktoping and different operating system stuff from my Mac as a general host. So I install what's now called the Windows app, which is a horrible name.
Horrible name.
Horrible name. It used to be very sensible. It used to be the Microsoft Remote Desktop app in the App Store, and it did what it said on the tin, and it was great. But now there's a new version of the app, and it's just called the Windows app, whatever that means. So I installed that for my remote desktop session stuff. That's just a quick install from the App Store. So there's nothing to go off and find and download from websites and extract and move and fiddle around with. You just click one button and it's there.
Yeah.
So that's good. I am always a bit geeky about when I buy a new Mac. I like to see how it compares with my old Mac and other machines that I have tested. So one of the things I install is a couple of benchmarking things. So I install Cinebench, for instance, Cinebench R23 or R24 now, probably, or 25 maybe. So I install that for benchmarking. And I also install Valley bench. I can't remember who makes it now. I'm just trying. I'm blanking on who makes it, but the Valley benchmark for GPU benchmarking. It's one of the things that's pretty difficult to do because comparing different hardware and different operating systems against each other is really tricky. And although Valley, as a benchmark, a graphical benchmark for the Mac, you could say isn't ideal because it's not Apple Silicon native, and it's also not. It doesn't understand anything other than OpenGL, which has been deprecated now. But in a way, that's a good thing because when you do a benchmark using Valley on your Mac against machines that are native 8.6 machines and so on, you get a really good indicator of how well the translation layers work. So the translation layer between 8.6 to ARM, for instance, and also OpenGL to DirectX and back and Metal and so on. So it goes through all these translation layers. So if you can still get a really nice frames per second result from the benchmarking using Valley on an Apple Silicon Mac, that's a really good indicator of just how incredibly well the whole system works to translate things that were never designed to run on that system and still run really well. I did a recent test on an M2 Mac Mini that came into the office before Christmas, and that gave me a score of 125 odd frames per second.
Wow.
Which compared very nicely to previous Macs with a dedicated graphics card. Say, for instance, an Intel Mac with a dedicated graphics card scored around 80 or 90 frames per second. So this easily beat that out, even though it was going through 2 to 3 translation layers each frame. It still was faster. So it's a really nice way to benchmark the GPU from between a Mac and a PC, and also you can run that on Linux hardware as well. So you can compare 8.6, ARM, and Linux and PC hardware against Macs, and it's a nice way to compare the three, so you can see what's going on. But it's a bit geeky, but I quite like to do. Whenever I get a new Mac, I celebrate by benchmarking it and comparing it to my old Macs. That's very Sheldon Cooper-like.
well, it is Sheldon Cooper-like, but I should probably mention that if folks are users of the Affinity suite, Affinity Photo Designer, Publisher, Affinity Photo specifically, under the help menu, has a benchmark tool.
Yes.
And
I always forget about that. Yeah.
Well, I do too, but when you mentioned benchmarking, it popped into my head because it is a really neat way to compare your old Mac to the new one. And it is genuinely a real-life comparison. This is an app that you used on the old Mac. It's an app that you're going to use on the new Mac. And so seeing how one compares to the other, if you have the opportunity to run the benchmark and take a screenshot on the old Mac and then run it on the new Mac, you have a very real one-to-one comparison of how that old Mac's going to compare to the new screaming Mac that you just bought. So, there are little tweaks and tools like that built into certain apps, and I just happen to remember that Affinity Photo had it. I don't think Designer does. I think it's built into Photo. But either way, if that's an app that you have, that's another great benchmarking tool that you have at your disposal. And it's not to compare PC to Mac, or Linux to Windows, or Windows to Mac OS, or what have you. It's to compare literally apples to apples. So
apples to apples, very good.
Yeah, I guess you could run it on a Windows. Affinity Photo is available for Windows. I guess you could run it there and see how it compares. But
I don't know how the benchmarking side of it works for Windows. But
it's a good tool to compare.
And of course, you have to buy it. You have to be able to own it. So the other benefit to the value benchmark for CPU benchmarking, at least, is that it's entirely free.
Or download a trial.
No need, because it's free.
No, I mean of Affinity Photo.
Oh, I see. For Affinity, yes. I did have a similar thing when I switched over from my Intel Mac to my now fairly old in a way, my M1 iMac. When I tried the AI upscale in Pixelmator.
Oh, yeah, another good tool.
Absolutely floored, because when I ran that, because I had a test image that I ran that through before I bought the new Mac on my old Intel Mac, and that took 58 odd seconds to run, which at the time was not bad, really.
You're lucky it was that quick.
Well, exactly. Yeah. And then when I got the new Mac, not realizing that I actually now have hardware AI cores, which the Intel Mac didn't have, I was absolutely floored and couldn't believe it. I had to run it several times, because the whole process, rather than taking 58 seconds, took half a second on the same test image.
Isn't it crazy?
I couldn't believe how quick it was. I couldn't believe that it was like done in like a blink of an eye. It was incredible. And now, of course, the AI engines are even more powerful in the new Mac. So I'm not even sure, even if I'd be able to measure the difference between half a second and 0.1 of a second that it probably is now.
But think about the stats, Darren. I mean, look at the percentage increase in speed between one over the other. Definitely makes it worth spending that extra money, doesn't it?
Oh, it did, yes. I was very impressed. I was very happy that I bought my new Mac. Although it's getting on a bit now. It's getting 4 years old. I mean, I don't think I'm planning to upgrade, though. I'm hoping. It's tricky, isn't it? It's one of the things I should probably ask, actually. How long would you expect the M1 range to be supported for new OS upgrades for? It's been 4 years now. The usual used to be, back in the day, it used to be 6 or 7 years or so. So is that going to be extended now because of Apple Silicon architecture being completely different to what it was like in the Intel days? So does that mean that support will carry on longer, or what would you expect?
We did talk about this briefly when Apple Silicon was new. At the time, I was worried that what was going to happen with the M1 series was what we saw happen with the Core Duo series. Not the Core 2 Duo, but the Core Duo. We had a very, very short lifespan of Macs that had the Core Duo before we moved on. And it was, that we found that these very quickly fell out of favor with the latest operating system upgrades and had a very short lifespan, the Core Duos. And I was worried that maybe we would see something like that happen with the M1s. So far, luckily, that has not come to pass. I feel as if, because it's Apple's own hardware, it's their own architecture, that we're going to probably continue to.
Of course. That would make a big difference.
It makes a big difference, and we're going to continue to see an investment on their part in this hardware, and give us similar expectations that we had towards the end of the Intel life cycle. Not the end, I guess I should say about 3/4 of the way, because towards the end we started to see stuff get lopped off more quickly because Apple wanted us to switch to Apple Silicon. But I think we'll probably at least enjoy 5 to 6 years out of it. That's what my gut is saying now. I was concerned it would be different when it first got released, but now I'm starting to realize that as you said, we're a good 3-4 years into it, and we're still seeing good support for it. And quite frankly, they're still running quite well. People who have an M1.
Yeah, I can't.
Yeah.
I'm amazed. I mean, I keep my Mac in quite good order, but it's as fast now as the time when I got it out of the box 4 years ago. And it's still absolutely fantastic. I can't see any reason to get a faster Mac, even though now it's considered one of the slowest.
Right,
which is odd.
It's odd, but it still performs just as well as it did when it was
performance is awesome.
New.
Yeah, performance is awesome.
And we have to remember, our jaws dropped. We were amazed at how quickly the M1 Macs ran, and when compared to the Intel Macs that we had just a couple months prior. So I don't think we should quite yet pick our jaws up off the ground. Yes, the M4s are arguably and statistically and factually so much faster than the M1. But is it so much faster that we, on a typical basis, on any given day, with the things that we do, I'm not talking about exporting Final Cut projects. I'm not talking about rendering large images. I'm not talking about, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about day-to-day usage. Is it going to be so much faster that we're going to say, I just have to get rid of that M1? It's just way too slow. And at the moment, I don't feel we're quite there yet.
So I'm not there with this.
Yeah,
I think this machine
I think we're good.
It's been wonderful.
I think we're good. Yeah. I have an M1 iMac that I bought last year, for goodness sakes, and it was a refurb. It was a sealed box refurb from Apple, but it was a fantastic deal. It gives me tons of storage. I have 16 gig of memory on it, and it does everything I need it to do. And I don't feel as if I'm lacking by not having an M3 or M4 iMac. I just don't.
No, exactly. Yeah.
For its usage, I don't feel like I'm lacking. Even the M1 Mac Studio, I don't feel as if I need to replace that yet. Now, with that said, the M2 Pro Mac Mini that I purchased for Macstock, I thought that was going to be more than powerful enough for what I needed it to do, and yet I hit a brick wall with it during Macstock weekend because I overestimated, based on my experience with the other Apple Silicon Macs, I overestimated the abilities of that M2 Pro, and that was my mistake. It's not the computer's mistake. The computer itself runs great for what it was designed for, but when I tried to push it past those boundaries, it fell down pretty hard. And
what was it that pushed it?
It was feeding in multiple cameras and recording each of those cameras as an ISO track or an isolated track. So recording all the video, recording the final program video. So I was recording the individual cameras, plus I was recording the program video, and I was pushing it out to multiple displays, to projectors and all that kind of stuff.
So it's sort of like a bandwidth issue then.
And it was when I was recording the individual video tracks that the machine started to falter. When I told it to only record the program track and record the audio tracks, it was fine. No problem with that at all. But if I wanted to record the individual video tracks, just as a little backup, just a little belt and suspenders, that was just a little too much for it. And, and that's fine. That's fine. I hit the limit. I know that limit now, and I won't push it anymore. But with all that said, Darren, those are the fantastic Mactastic tweaks that we make to new Macs when we set them up. It's actually quite a lot of changes, as you can tell from the length of this episode, but I'm sure there are tweaks that we don't make that you do make. So be sure to drop me a line, leave a comment in the show notes for this episode, and share some of your favorite tweaks that you make to every new Mac that you set up. Now, One last thing before we wrap up the show, Darren, and that is our Essential app. You know, last year we had the Essential Apps episode in January, and we decided to do a new Essential app every episode moving forward, just moving forward. And I think we've had so much fun with doing Essential Apps that we're going to just keep doing it. Every episode, we will present a new Essential app. And the reason I'm picking this app, which is called LinearMouse, one word, linearmouse.app is the website. The reason I'm picking this app is because of something that we talked about when we mentioned how we tweak the trackpad and the mouse on our Macs. And both of us said that we turn off natural scrolling. And yet there are folks who might feel that natural scrolling is perfect for a trackpad, but not so great on a mouse. But you can't do that on a Mac. You can't individually control settings like natural scrolling for different input devices that you might have on the Mac. But with LinearMouse, you can. LinearMouse supports per device settings. Not only can you apply different settings to your mice and your trackpads, but like I said, if you're uncomfortable with natural scrolling on a mouse, well, you can reverse that scrolling direction on the mouse, but keep it natural scrolling on the trackpad. So you can set the mouse to the correct way without affecting the trackpad. LinearMouse also allows you to independently adjust a setting that you make, Darren, and that's your pointer acceleration and your pointer speed. So if you want a faster or slower pointer speed for the trackpad versus the mouse, LinearMouse allows you to make those changes. You can even do stuff like disable pointer acceleration if you're a gamer or designer and you need a little bit more pointer accuracy. So it's a pretty cool app. And even cooler, it's free. It's available as a free download on GitHub. And it is also, you can download it from linearmouse.app. I found it to be a pretty good app. It does do as it's written on the tin, you know, as they say. It does exactly that. But it seems to be maybe a little futzy when it comes to knowing which mouse or which input device you are making settings changes for. And part of that, I believe, comes down to a setting within the app where it automatically tries to determine which device you are using at any given time. In other words, if I'm on my MacBook Pro and I've got the mouse turned on and I've got the trackpad, its claim to fame is that it will identify which device you're using and automatically switch. Well, if I'm going in and trying to adjust the settings on LinearMouse and I'm using the mouse, but I want to make the settings changes for the trackpad, it seemed to kind of get a little messed up there. But you can't fault it for that when you can easily turn off that setting and then much more accurately adjust the trackpad and mouse without that turned on. Considering the price, I think it's a fantastic app for someone who wants to adjust the individual settings on their different input devices. And if you want to investigate it yourself and maybe give it a try and see if it will perform well for you, you can download it from linearmouse.app. And we will have a link for that in the show notes.
Cool.
And with that said, Darren, that is going to do it for this episode of For Mac Guys Only. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Remember, we do love to get your letters, so if you have any comments about the show, a tip to share, a software or hardware problem with your Mac, or you have your own settings tweaks that you would like to share with us, you can leave your favorites in the comments of this week's show notes found at formacguysonly.com, or you can always drop me a line, mike@formacguysonly.com. And do be sure to subscribe to the show's YouTube channel at youtube.com/FMEOTV and click that little notification bell, click, so that you can find out when we are going live. You can join the chat room. I should put a little animation down here, you know, like they always do. Click the notification bell. You can join the chat room and catch all the behind the scenes stuff that doesn't make the final cut of the show, like that bad joke I just made. Hey, Darren, what's the best way for folks to get a hold of you?
Well, this could be different now. So potentially, since I am a fully paid up member of FMEO now, potentially it could be Darren out for Mac Eyes Only, but I haven't checked the info yet, so I don't know if that's active or what.
I sent you the info just earlier today.
Which I didn't have time to look at yet, so yes.
You are 100% correct, my friend. As the new third co-host for Mac Eyes Only, you can be reached at Darren@formaceysonly.com now. Yay!
Woohoo!
Thanks so much for listening, everyone. Thanks to Darren for joining me this episode. Stay subscribed, and we'll talk to you next time.
No worries.